Biblical researchers have now shown that most of the Old Testament comes from other, older, more ancient writings. Even Jewish writers admit that most of the Hebrew writings were merely taken freely from Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian, and even Greek sources. The Book of Job was taken from an early and obscure Greek play. Researchers have admitted that there are too many significant parallels between the Vedic hymns and the books of Joel and Isaiah to be a coincidence. Most of the book of Genesis is based on the Sumerian creation myth, that the story of Noah comes from the Sumerian legend of Gilgamesh. The Psalms were taken word for word from Akhenaten's hymns to the sun, written 600 years earlier in Egypt. The Ten Commandments were taken from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and so on through the books of the Old Testament. The Hebrew people, who trace their ancestral beginnings to the Sumerian civilization, cities of Ur, Babylon and others, did what all people throughout history have done, taken things, knowledge, experiences, stories and histories, from other, older civilizations and over time, made them their own. Stories, myths, and events that took place in Sumeria simply traveled north with the people who would become the Hebrews. Over time, through the verbal and, eventually, written transmission of these older stories and events, they were assimilated and became the stories, events, and histories of the Hebrew people themselves. In history, this type of social/cultural assimilation is actually very common. So many of the events, stories, and histories of the Old Testament, the Torah, did not originate with the Hebrew people themselves, but are actually events, stories, and histories that originated with other, older civilizations, as modern research has now shown. Jesus never wrote anything himself. No gospel, no letters, no notes, no diary. He didn't have a scribe or secretary writing down the many things he said and did. The 12 apostles never wrote any gospels themselves. They didn't have scribes or secretaries writing down the many things they said and did, at least not while they were alive. The first of the 4 canonized Gospels to be written, Mark, was done so at least 65 years after the death of Jesus. The other 3 Gospels, Matthew, Luke and John, followed during the next 50 years or so. It is obvious that if the Apostle Mark was an adult when he followed Jesus, and if people at that time only lived on average 40 years, he couldn't have written the Gospel of Mark. He would have had to be over 80 years old. So, it was originally written by one of his, Mark's followers, or even more likely, someone in the 3rd generation after Jesus. The other Gospels were even further away from the primary source, Jesus. So where did the Gospel writings come from? From men based on the spoken word, stories, that had already been told and repeated for more than 60 years. Just think about it. How reliable are men in their storytelling? After 60 years of being told and repeated, how reliable are the stories themselves? Then, about 280 years later, and thanks to the Roman Emperor Constantine I, and the church leaders of his time and those who followed during the next 1,000 plus years, each book of the New Testament was edited, rewritten, embellished, parts eliminated, and other parts fabricated. Mary Magdalene has the reputation in Christianity, King James Bible, as being a repentant prostitute. However, these claims are unfounded. In the Gnostic Gospels, Mary is referenced as an apostle, and the most important to, or most loved by Jesus. She was at the crucifixion, she was first at the tomb and first to see the resurrected Jesus. In the Bible, Mary was never referred to as a prostitute or sinner until Pope Gregory I, Gregory the Great, made statements in that regard and created the composite Magdalene in about 591 AD. Over the years that followed, parts of the Bible were rewritten in order to reflect this new version of Mary, a version that empowered men and subordinated women. This is a small part of the masculinization or the ongoing development of a male-dominated version of the Bible, which began with Emperor Constantine 266 years earlier in 325 AD. Modern-day scholarship has restored the understanding of Mary of Magdalene as an important early Christian leader and favored apostle. Under the Emperor Constantine, the new Roman Church would need laws in order to control and subdue its people. The Holy Bible was put together through a process which considered and eliminated many Christian writings which were circulating in that day, early 4th century AD. The writings which were chosen for the canonized Bible had to be acceptable to the many different Christian leaders, bishops, who had many different ideas, beliefs and practices, and who were all now under the scrutiny of the Emperor. First Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. Those who would not agree on new, standardized structures and practices, or would not accept edited, rewritten, and or embellished versions of the Bible writings, and those who wouldn't practice the correct Christianity, according to the Emperor and his Holy Roman Church, were exiled or put to death. I'm certain that's exactly how Jesus would have done it himself.
Want a new Honda that's Arizona ready? Truckloads of Honda cars and SUVs are arriving daily. Pick the model, color, and equipment and give